Hey everyone, welcome back to the Rawhide Roundup. I'm your host, Heather Dallas, and I'm very excited about the guest I have for you this week. We go way back to when I was a kid and he was working with my dad in the bucking bull industry, but he is much more than just a cowboy in the bucking bull industry. He, like my dad, is also an inventor. He's a CEO of his business. He's still involved in ranching, cattle management. He does a lot of public speaking. And he is also a security extraordinaire. And we will get into all of those details and make it all make sense here in a minute. But without further ado, let's welcome Richard Nevels out of Arkansas to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Heather. What a pleasure it is. And I'm really looking forward to this. And like I've shared before, the McDonalds have a very special place in my heart. So I'm excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, you're one of those names from my childhood of the Bucking Bulls that I remember hearing your name. And, my very first podcast for this roundup was with my dad. And in that podcast, he even mentions you because I was asking him, how we came up with the name Rawhide for Rawhide Portable Corral. And when I was visiting with him, before visiting with you today, he said it was L21 was the bull that he got from you that he ended up naming Rawhide. And that kind of came from just the Rawhide cowboy history, but also the Rawhide energy plant that we used to live by. And so do you remember that bull?
I absolutely do. He was a big gray Cimbra muley. And I knew he was pretty special. I used to buy semi-loads of those bulls out of South Texas and Louisiana before the breeding programs were so big. And L21 came in on a set of those Louisiana bulls, and he was special from day one. But he was also very angry and really bad in the chutes. And I knew John would be one of the very few people that could handle him outside myself, and he did amazing with him when he was hauling.
He did. There's a handful of bulls growing up that we remember and just have some memories with. And he's one of those bulls that I can remember causing my dad a lot of fits at home too. He would go get in the creek and not come out and get up in some trees, and he'd have a heyday getting him out. So I think he was a handful, but he was worth it.
Yeah, he was angry from that day. When he stepped off that truck from Louisiana in Dodge City, Kansas, he was angry about it, and he never got over it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you and my dad go back to the Bucking Bull days when Dad was, I guess, was this before Bull Riders Only or during Bull Riders Only that he was working with you?
Actually, we actually became acquainted before BRO. And then John got really big into BRO shortly after we had met, and that's where I would see him a lot. And then too, I've shared with him before. It just always amazed me how meticulous he was of putting those arenas up and down, and was an artist at it, And but yeah, I could just sit there for hours and just watch, but not that I would want to help with those panels, 110-pound panels and stuff, but it's pretty amazing to watch how he knew exactly how to unfold it, put it all back up, and everything fit perfectly on those trucks. So
yeah, I'd say he would probably say that a lot of that was him, but also he gives a lot of credit to learning from Jerome Robinson. And he is one of those people, he taught us growing up, like, you may not have all the answers, but you study who's doing it and you see how they do it, and then you'll learn, so pay attention and be coachable and all those things. And so I think that's part of, what he learned from Jerome and put his own spin on it.
And that's pretty amazing too, because that was one of my number one mentors when I was starting out in the PRCA in the late 70s. Jerome and Jody Thetone gathered me up and they said, this poor dumb kid from Mississippi needs a little bit of help. So they gathered me up and took me, and yeah, it's I think the world of Jerome Robinson. He was amazing. He's another one of those guys that he is what helped set my mindset that allowed me to be as diverse as I was, because he was straight business now. He wasn't just a bull rider. He was a businessman bull rider.
Sure. So diversifying, I mean, you have a lot of angles in your life. We're talking about the bull side of things. You're still involved in the cattle industry. So, you're located in Arkansas there. So I guess just kind of before we get into the rest of it, but what is your involvement with the cattle industry right now?
I just recently sold all of my bred livestock and everything that we raised bulls out of and stuff for all those years and everything. And then of course we just got to raising some beef cattle, and then making sure that all the when you have 15 grandkids, it takes a lot of beef to get everybody fed and stuff. So
I
making
can
sure we had
imagine.
plenty of butcher cattle, for it and stuff. And then two, cowboying's kind of a dying art anymore. So I always had plenty of work around here to go and help gather for people. And it didn't take long for the word to spread. Hey, if you have something that can't be caught, call Nevels. He'll go catch it.
There you go. That's perfect. All right. So, how, in your background, just talking about, you've been involved with the bulls. When did you get involved with the Homeland Security and TSA? So, that's been a big part of your history here that I want to go into. So, kind of lead us down your path into that realm.
Well, I'll tell you what led to that, Heather, is, it's like I said, I competed for 30 years, and I was 43 and I was still going, and I was going to PBRs, and one of my favorite PBRs was Pendleton. And I love Pendleton, where the pavement ends and the Wild West begins. They don't even plow the arena. Buck them on the grass. And I loved it. And we were still living in Dodge City, and I would always just hop on a plane and fly into Portland, and then drive to get me a rental car and drive down to Pendleton and get on and ride my bull, and then drive back to Portland, get on a plane and fly back. We always had 3,000 to 5,000 head of starter cattle on feed there at the feed yards at Dodge. And I had done that, and I was feeling pretty good about things. I think that night, and Adriano and Justin McBride and them kids were there, and they were calling me Papa then, because I already had grandkids. And I said, that's okay. I said, because it's pretty embarrassing when Papa takes your money, isn't it? And
I can
I think
imagine.
I was 85 that night, so pretty good for the old guy. And so I hopped in that car, and I drove back to Portland, and I got there early in the morning, and I had a 6 o'clock flight out that morning, headed back to Dodge. I had a lot of sick cattle I needed to get back to, and I was actually walking down the jetway with a couple that were on the way to see their first grandson. And we were talking about grandkids and how special they were. And we got just about to the door of the plane, and one of the flight attendants said, "Folks, we need you to come back out." And I thought, bummer. I bet it's a mechanical. I hope we're not here too long. I really need to get back to Dodge. We stepped back out into that concourse. Utter chaos. There were people on the floor crying. And I looked up at those TV monitors, and that was 9/11/01. And I kept, like everybody else, I was just staring at it, and I was saying, that's not real. There's no way that's our New York. That's not our Twin Towers. That's not our people. But it was. It was very real. And after a couple of hours, I realized planes weren't going anywhere. And like I said, I've been flying in and out there for years. And I always rented from Enterprise. And I called Enterprise real quick, and I said, "Hey, do you have a car?" And they said, "Hey, we've got you one. We'll save you one. Just get here." And said, "You can drop it off wherever you want to." And that couple that were on the way to see their grandson, they said, "Hey, we're not going to get to go see him today." He said, "We'll give you a ride to the car rental place." And they took me over, and I called Bobby on the way in. I said, "Hey," I said, "this is a bad deal." I said, "Meet me in Denver, and I'll drop the car off there." I drove straight. It's 1,400 miles, and I just drove. And I did a lot of praying along the way. I was praying about the lives that were lost, what was going to happen, what could we do. And you have to be careful when you're praying, particularly when you ask something. Because I remember somewhere in there saying, "I don't know what a simple old puncher could do, but if you will lead, I will follow." So when I got back, and Bobby picked me up, and then we dropped the car off there because there wasn't even anywhere in Dodge City to drop a car off. And we left it in Denver and drove across, and I went straight to the National Guard Armory. I said, "Take me to the Armory." And I walked in there, and that sergeant was sitting at the front desk, and I said, "Sergeant," I said, "sign me up. I want to go fight." And he said, "Sir, how old are you?" I said, "I'm 43. He said, "Do you have any prior military?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you're too old." I said, "Let me tell you something, son. You send me to boot camp, and if I can't kick those 19-year-olds behind just like I just did," I said, "then you tell me I'm too old." He said, "No, sir, I don't doubt it, but we have our protocol." So I said, "Okay." I said, "So I wasn't meant to fight. So you lead, I'll follow." October the 20th, 2002, the Transportation Security Administration hired me as the Supervisory Transportation Security Officer. And I did my initial training in Wichita. That was our hub. And at the time, we were still under the Department of Transportation. So Norman Mineta was the Secretary of Transportation at the time, and came in and swore us in when we finished our training. And I actually had the honor and privilege of being one of the supervisors in charge that federalized the little Cat 4 airport of Dodge City, Kansas.
Nice.
But Dodge City's a little Cat 4 airport. Little D-1900Ds, little 19-seat planes is all that comes in and out of there. So after about 6 months, I'd realized I probably have learned about all I'm going to learn here in Dodge City, Kansas. So I asked my federal security director that was out of Wichita, I said, "Mr. Osborne," I said, "I would like to be the best at what we do." I said, "Please send me TDY to a Cat X or a Cat 1 airport, somewhere where I can get really good at what we do." And he said, "Well, they're needing TDY, temporary duty officers, in Alaska for the summer season." He says, "You can go to Anchorage, Alaska, and help them there, TDY, from June to September." And he said, "It'll be super busy, busier than you probably wanted." I said, "Perfect." And so June the 1st, I left for Anchorage, Alaska, and got introduced there as a supervisor. They kind of liked what they'd seen and heard from my federal security director, so they actually gave me the international terminal at Anchorage, Alaska. And I ran the morning shift, the first 12 hours of the morning at the international terminal there in Anchorage, Alaska. And after 74 days, one of the transportation security managers came up and he said, "We need to talk." I said, "Well, I'm a little bit busy right now." And it was a peak time. And he says, "You've got good leads. You can lead someone." And we stepped back into the concourse. He says, when is the last time you had an RDO? I said, "Oh, what?" He said, "A regular day off." I said, "I haven't." He said, "You've been here for 75 days and you haven't had a day off?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "How many shifts a day do you work?" I said, "They'll only let me work 2. I said, "They let me work 16 hours a day, but they make me take 8 off." I said, "You can't really call this work. This is gainful employment." And he said, you need to take a day off. I says, no, sir, I really don't need to. And he said, we want you to take a day off.
We're forcing you to take a day off.
Yeah. So I did, but long story short, during that time, and I became kind of known, well, to the agency. The director for the National Deployment Office came through, and that's the mobile unit of TSA. And he came and he introduced himself to me. He said, I've heard, he said, I would like you to be a point of contact for us. I would like you to join the ranks of the National Deployment Office. Would you be interested in that? And he said, you would travel around the country and support different causes and stuff. So I said, sure, I'd love that. That'd be good. And, and let me get even better at what we're doing and diverse. So I did that, and that was in 02. I did that till 05, and then in 05 they said, would you become the area coordinator for us and manage the entire western region from Alaska to the Pacific Islands and west to Colorado? He said, you'll have approximately 400 officers under you, and you'll be at 60 different locations. I said, it'd be an honor and a privilege. And so I did that till 07, and we got to doing so many unique events. And in 2004, they picked 3 supervisors to send to the Madison Square Garden to lead a group of officers to help Secret Service at the RNC. And I was one of those 3. And because of that, and then my acquaintance with the Secret Service, the National Deployment Office asked me, said, and specialized programs then also said, hey, we'd like you to come over here and base out of Arlington and be our Eastern area coordinator. You'll handle the East, the Northeast, the Southeast, the South Central, and you keep Alaska because they don't want anyone else in Alaska. So,
left a good impression.
Yeah, good. Again, honor and a privilege, So from there, we worked a lot of major events. We did a lot of national disaster recovery. So we worked all the Katrinas, Gustavs, Ivans. When those airports got hit, those officers, of course, couldn't work. So we would bring TDY officers in to get them stood back up while their officers recovered. And we'd get through those. And then I worked every RNC for the 15 years I was there. They always asked me to cover the RNC with the Secret Service. And in 2008, I had the honor and privilege to be asked to be the lead to take 375 TSA officers into the Obama's first inauguration and assist Secret Service, ICE, and CBP with screening 250,000 people in that morning for the inauguration. And all these deals are year in planning, so.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of recon. And so we did that. And when it was over, the hot wash that we had was very good, and they were very pleased with our officers, and our officers did an amazing job. And so when it got time to start planning for the 13 inauguration in late 2011, early 12, they said, we got along so well at the first one. The second one, we're not going to have ICE and CBP come back. We want just TSA, but we want the Cowboy to lead it.
Perfect.
So again, very humbling. And so I got to take 675 officers in that one with me. And again, it was an amazing event. We got through it. We roll call them 4 guys at 1:30 in the morning, and we usually don't get them back to the bulletin until around 2100. So that's January. Yeah. It's not very pleasant out there. And but not a single incident, and that we didn't keep quiet. There was never a disturbance, and so that led to being able to lead 1,500 officers and assist when Pope Francis came in 2015 and stopped at Washington, New York, and Philly. And so I had 500 officers with me in D.C. when he arrived, and we screened there. And then when he jumped to the G8 conference in New York, my counterpart was there with 500 more officers, and my 500 and we jumped to Philly, where I had 500 more officers waiting for me. So when he got there Saturday for the mass, we had 1,000 officers on hand and covered a 12-mile area with checkpoints. And from 6 that morning till 6 that afternoon, we put another 250,000 people through without incident. And so pretty humbling again. Very, very humbling. I was sitting out in front of the hotel about 11 o'clock that night, sitting on one of the golf carts that the Secret Service had that they used to get back and forth on. And I'd always walk those routes constantly, going from checkpoint to checkpoint, checking on the officers, making sure troubleshooting anywhere they needed it. And about 11 o'clock, the team came in, the Secret Service team came in off the rooftops. And I'm not going to say who they are or what they are, but they come in. The LT said, "Cowboy, we did it again." I said, "We did, LT." I said, I don't know why, but the hair kept standing up on the back of my neck. And he says, "We use you for a marker," because I was always a suit and tie, but I always had this silver belly hat on and boots, so I stuck out in the crowds. So that's what they would say on the radio. They said, "Find the Cowboy. He's on 8th and Constitution. Mark him in the 2 clicks to your north." And
impressive.
So it was a joke with them, that we use you for our marker.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a great reputation and that you did a great job while you were there.
Well, it was very humbling for a simple old puncher to be there doing those things.
So, you and I were talking a little bit before we started the podcast about where you're from, and we were kind of joking about the fact that, people think my dad was this engineer with some engineering degree, and he wasn't. He was animal science. And so tell everybody about your background and that story you told me when we were getting ready.
Well, I was there in TSA headquarters, and of course, 90% of the team there within our agency were prior military, prior law enforcement, prior FBI, and all of them with those kind of backgrounds. And so it was always a joke said, how did we get the Cowboy? And I would always tell them, I said, there's certain things that are out of your control. I said, it was divine intervention. I said, he knew that there needed to be some common sense injected inside or somewhere. And they said, well, where was your education from? And I said, well, West Point. I graduated West Point. And they said, oh, you went to the military academy. I said, oh, no, West Point High. West Point, Mississippi. I graduated high school from West Point. And they said, that's it. And I'll tell you another part of that. Of course, that's a lot of type A personalities, when you get together, and a lot of interagency discussions, and everyone has their own ideas and protocols and way things go. So it gets pretty heated sometimes,
I'm sure.
And we were in one of those meetings one day, and there was a lieutenant colonel giving a briefing, and I said, "Sir," I said, "you're going to have to help a simple old puncher understand, because what you're saying doesn't make sense, and it's not going to work." And he says, "Well, I'll see if I can dummy it down for you." And I said, "Well, hold on just a minute." I said, "Let me explain something to you." I said, "The use of polysyllabic words is a sesquipedalian process that may indicate some degree of education, but it has nothing to do with intelligence, and it certainly doesn't reflect wisdom, because if you reflected any wisdom at all, you'll understand that you will never, ever address me that way again. Do you understand me, sir? And you could have heard a pin drop in that conference
I was
room.
going to say, I'm sure his jaw probably hit the floor.
Yeah, yeah. And he said, "Yes, sir, I understand. Forgive me." I said, "You're forgiven. Carry on."
Carry on. That's perfect. Well, I was guilty. I was looking through your history online and I saw West Point High School, and you kind of have to do a double take, West Point, Mississippi. But
Yeah,
it would make sense with everything you accomplished. You know, one wouldn't be surprised if you were a West Point background, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah,
So,
that's actually my girl and I. I've had the same girlfriend for 47 years, and she's been my bride for 46, about to be 47 and 48. So, and that
congratulations.
we we were both born and raised in West Point, but we left there in 1980 and never been back the other side of the river. So,
Okay. Well, it sounds like Arkansas is suiting your family pretty well where you guys
yeah,
are at.
yeah, it really is. It really is. You know, we started out in Guymon, Oklahoma, and we spent 7 years in Guymon from 80 to 87. And 87 we moved to Dodge City, Kansas, to start helping Chris Hedlund and them up there in rodeos. And I was already putting rodeos on all across that uh, Oklahoma, Kansas, New Mexico, Texas. And so we spent the next 20 years in Dodge City. And then while I was with TSA, we tried Austin for 5 years, but too big, too busy. And we moved collectively from Dodge City to Austin, all three girls, husbands, grandbabies. We had more while we were in Austin. And then when we decided to move there, we all just, it takes us a little while. It takes about a year for us to make all those transitions. But we got everyone here, plus my in-laws and stuff. So we have all of our immediate families within 20 minutes of each other right here. And it's quite a
That's
blessing.
impressive.
Yeah.
Hey, I know it is. I lived a long ways from family for 8.5 years and not having grandparents close. And so we're not as close as that, but I can definitely say it's nice to have them closer.
Yeah.
It's much
Yeah.
appreciated.
Yep.
Good. Well, I will say on the security side of things, you know, you had that awesome career. You did a lot in those years, but you do have listed, you still do some security consulting for people.
I do.
Yeah. What's that
So,
like?
yeah. So, like, you know, school shootings had gotten a little rough a decade or so ago, you know, and so the Gravette School District asked me to come in and, like for them and church, I do church security. I'll come in and do risk assessments and look over all their facilities, go over their evacuation plans, their active shooter plans, etc. And then I'll put together a summary and a plan and recommendations for them. And I've done that for the Gravette Independent School System and a number of our churches here and stuff. So those kind of deals, just try to keep everyone in those areas and locally safe. And so that's my consulting side of it.
Yeah. That's appreciated. That's to have that kind of knowledge in your background to pass that on. Good. Well, we talk about moving to Arkansas, and I'm going to go ahead and lead that into your invention. You know, I think that's a very cool thing you have going on
Yeah.
right now. It's exciting. I was showing it to my husband. So Blade Solution you started, but
Yes.
you know, the old saying, necessity breeds invention. So give us a little backstory on how you got started with your invention.
But absolutely. So we do live right here in the edge of the Ozarks, and the thing that we grow the very best here is rocks, flint rock, above all that. So this is a super nice little place, a lot of trees, amazing Bermuda and fescue. We get like 49 inches of rain annually here. So it stays green. Here in Northwest Arkansas, we're always 10 days away from a drought, because if you don't have rain every 10 days, they're considering it a drought. And but I found very quickly that those rocks do truly grow here. I would mow an area and get along fine, and then all of a sudden, the edge of that deck would catch one of those edges that after a rain, that moisture had gone in, and it caused that rock to raise up just another half inch. The edge of that deck would catch it and roll it up. Well, when it rolled it up out of the ground, it wasn't a rock. It was a boulder the size of a football. And I knocked 3 spindles out from under a zero-turn mower within about 30 days. And I thought, there has got to be a better way. There's got to be something that has some give to it, some flexibility. And I was weed eating my front fence line. I have just about 300 yards of front fence line, and I have to weed eat it because it's on a really steep hill, and that's the only way you can do it. And I was hanging on the fence and weed eating and holding that, and I was hitting those T-posts and roots and rolling rocks off down that hill. And I thought, this works. I just keep adding line. I said, I wonder if something like that would work on a lawnmower. So I went back and all excited and got online and got to looking, and there was nothing out there. There were walk behind trimmers, but not something that just went on a mower so you could put 3 of them on a deck of a mower and you could actually mow in speed. So I thought, well, the good Lord, he said, son, you're not the sharpest pencil in the case, but he says, I can help you out. And that's where necessity met the mother of invention. And I went to drawing and sketching and thinking, and I wanted to keep it simple. I didn't want it to be complicated. I wanted it to work with everything that was already on the lawnmower. I didn't want to have to do any adapters and all of that. And so started that, and that was actually 16. 17, I filed my first provisional patent. 18, I filed my first non-provisional patent, and kept it evolving across there like that. I actually had the divine intervention of a good friend of mine that rode bulls. It was about 10 years younger, but he was one of those generations that I was still going. When he was going, I saw him at a fraternity in Seneca, Missouri, at a border town casino where they were having big fraternity bull runs. And I said, hey, it's great to see you and everything. And I said, what are you doing now? He said, well, when I quit riding bulls, I went back to school, and I'm an aeronautical engineer. And I said, really? I said, have I got a deal for you? And so John Tullis helped me design my first prototype.
That's awesome.
And so
another cowboy.
Yep. And he had a good friend that was Jeremy Wyman, and Jeremy is still with our team today. And I formed an LLC to start with, and now we're a corporation. We went with a C Corp because it's more investment friendly, easier to operate. But it's really evolved from 17 to now. We went through all those prototypes, field testing, hundreds of hours, did a soft rollout in 2020 right during the pandemic. And we had China produce it at the time, so that was a little hairy.
Yeah.
Trying to get them not to send you more virus over with your hubs. And but it continued to get good, and then the good Lord, he did it again. I was really, really needing someone on the team that understood the entrepreneurship, that understood investment, that had that background. And so he brought him from California and placed him right next door. My VP, who our back fences meet. Now they're actually separated by one little pasture. Had 30 years in Silicon Valley. And then the
Nice.
good Lord took him from Silicon Valley and put him right next door to me. Now, what do you think the chances of that is?
That is impressive.
And so Steve Harari is now my VP of finance and marketing. He has 30 years, over 20 startup companies. He has been the CEO and owner of half of those. All of them with sales. And then when they decided to retire and leave California, he moved right next door and actually lived there for over a year before we actually ever met. And he took on he became the president of the Chamber of Commerce for Gravit, and that's how I met him and saw his background. And so we got together, and we have been a team ever since, and we both agree wholeheartedly that it was divine intervention. We start every meeting with a prayer, and we end every meeting with a prayer. So
Oh, that's so
so
awesome. You
yeah,
can't get much better placement of somebody than that. When
yeah,
right when you need it too.
yeah, it's been phenomenal. So 2024 we did our first production actual. Let's take a big shot at this. We got a new engineering team out of Plano, Texas, Cobalt Product Solutions, and we hired them. But again, it takes a lot of funds to get through those deals. We were well into it, and I told them, I said, hey, I need to pause for just a minute and regroup, get some more funds put together and stuff. And I said, oh, okay. And about a week later, the two owners of Cobalt called me, and they said, hey, what would you think if we invested in the company? We we believe so much in what you're doing. We'll fund this production run. We'll fund the 1,500 units. So
Can't beat that.
again, divine intervention. And
That's so cool.
so we didn't even get them until July. Because it takes time. Their sister company is in Vietnam, and so they came from Vietnam, and we didn't get them until the 3rd of July, I think, before we could start shipping and really selling. And in 90 days, we sold 1,100 of those 1,500 units.
How awesome.
And so we ordered another 1,500, and we kicked it off again. And it's one of those things. I had said a little prayer back there in about that April of 24, and said, well, God got us in the way you'd have us go. I really need your help. And it just kind of blew up social media and everything. And again, we couldn't really afford to do any paid ads and stuff. Everything was organic. But it blew up into thousands and millions of views. Like I said, we sold 1,100 of those 1,500 in less than 90 days. Turned right around, worked on it all winter, regrouped, got things, did some more field test improvements, working on a new Revo Line 2.0 right now. We kicked it off again this April, and I remember on a Tuesday saying, okay, I'm really leaning into you again. I could use some help. Careful what you ask for. Because I started at 02:30 Wednesday morning, and I never got out in front of this laptop until 2200 Thursday night. We took in over 100 and some odd orders. in that
Wow.
44-hour period. It was faster than I could type and stuff and get those in. And it just blew across there. And we did a real night. My social media manager graduated Gravette High School 2 years ago. And when he graduated, we had met him, and I'd met him there at schools. He played football with some of our grandkids, and he said, I'd really like to learn about entrepreneurship from you. And Steve, he says, I'm going to go to University of Arkansas on an entrepreneurial scholarship in marketing. And so we did an internship with him that summer, and we liked him so much and helped us with social media and started doing that for me. That's what I called him, was my social media manager. And then he started his freshman year of U of A and got even sharper on those things. And he kept wanting to stay on, so we granted him some options and gave him some incentives to stay. And now I've got him. He's in his second year, and just he and I do the reels. All that reels you see, it's always me on them doing it, and McCoy's behind it on the camera. And during that time that I would run 44 hours, and I laid down and took a 3-hour nap and did 20 more hours the next day. And it's just been that way now for about 90 days straight.
Wow.
Just as fast as you can go. And we did a reel sometime that week, and in 3 days it had 10 million views. And so it's just blown up, and just what a phenomenon, and again,
It's the power of social media too.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
once it clicks, it just starts sending it out to people. That's awesome. No better marketing than that.
Yeah. So
Wow.
So that's kind of where we're at now, and it's just been amazing. We just had to order another 1,500 units. We ran out again. We got those another 1,500 in, and then as soon as they arrived, we shipped 450 of them immediately. We already had those orders, and still we send anywhere from 50 to 100 out a week now, and it's
Are
just
you mostly
continued
finding
on.
them in the U.S. or have you shipped to some random places?
We're actually not doing any international shipping yet.
Okay.
We've kind of been staying out of that for a bit. I say that we've had a few. We've got some in the UK, I think Denmark, but they were military, U.S. military,
Okay.
ordered them, so it went through the APO, through the Army Post Office, is how they could order
Yeah.
them, because it served as a U.S. address. But we're in 49 states, 3 U.S. territories, and a couple of countries for U.S. military. So
That's
so
awesome.
it's been pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, well, I can see why they take off. I was going through the reels, and just it's one thing for people to hear about it, but when you can see it working, it's a whole, people are visual. They want to see the proof that it's going to do the job, and you can see it right there, and you show what it looks like underneath, and you can see what exactly is doing the job. So I think it's impressive.
Well,
Kudos
thank you
to
very
you.
much. And we try to keep it real, and I say it often when we're doing those deals. It's live and unrehearsed. It's McCoy and I, and we don't script anything, or we just shoot, and he has to, he has to do some editing on this old puncher, so that gets things like they should be.
Sure. Just a few
Yeah.
editing. I'm sure it's not much.
No.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that he was somebody that you could reach out to, because I think that's probably going to make a huge difference for you
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
in the future, having that online presence there.
Yeah.
Well, impressive. Well, like I said, you remind me so much of Dad with being able to invent something and be successful. And I swear something about just you guys being cowboys, just being able to persevere and stick to it. And
And
kudos to you guys.
John and your mom Mary, they've been a huge part of it. You know, they've helped with some seed investments in this, and when I first moved here, John built me the most amazing arena. We talked about it, Clay. He and I, so we designed it in our heads, and I was telling him what I wanted, and then of course, he just instantly put it together, and everyone that came here was just in awe of it. So because it was
That's
just
awesome.
it worked like magic.
And didn't you have on your shoe? Are you the one that had a crash cage at one point, or
I
what? Like for
did.
the bulls?
Yep. So the design was amazing. So we had plenty of pins. We had loading. I only had one buck and shoot, but it was both deliveries. He hinged it on both sides. All you had to do was change two pins, and it went from a left delivery to a right delivery, and you could load from both sides, and the alley went right straight through the chute to the working chute, and he had one of the solar hydraulic controlled work chutes with the crash gate on it, so you could open it all the way up and let them big horn kettle through. And I don't know. That's why I sold L21 to your dad, because he was a muley. I didn't like muleys. Then the only reason I kept him as long as I did was because he was so mean. And if I had a muley around, you could bet he was not friendly. And but yeah, John knew I had all them big horns all the time, and he put that crash gate on there for me, and it was amazing.
We've had some customers reach out about buffalo, and that's one of the recommendations or things that they would want on their corral is to have that. And so, we've been able to tell them, and I think we even had some pictures of yours that we've been able to share. We've had several customers with buffalo have rawhides. I think they understand the durability of what we build. It's not cheap stuff. It's going to last. And so we've done it. We have some out there. Not a ton, but
yeah. That's John. John, he could build corrals for Jurassic Park. Yeah,
I'm sure he probably could.
Yep, he could. Not a doubt in my mind.
That's awesome. I had to laugh because I just made a funny reel. I didn't share it, but I just sent it to my family. But we go out on our ranch in these side-by-sides, and Dad has like 3 total different side-by-sides out there. And when we have all the family out, we'll load up and be in a row of 2 or 3, and we're taking these paths through the ranch. And I always tell him it makes me think of Jurassic Park theme music when we're riding through there, and you come up on the cows on the top of the hill, and you've each got your side-by-side. But I'll have to let him know that he's been challenged to a corral for dinosaurs.
Yep.
Well, good. Yeah, well, I'm so thankful that you had some time. I knew when I called you, you were busy taking orders. You've been busy, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And I tried to get Dad and Ethan on here, and they are just busy getting ready for the fair, but we may have to do a follow-up here down the road. Maybe we'll make a trip down there, do one in person, and get Dad and Ethan, because I'm sure you guys have a lot more interesting things to talk about than maybe what I could come up with.
Yeah, it would probably get pretty Western when we get, because the older we get, the better we rode.
Never.
Yeah.
No, that's probably very true. Dad was telling my kids a story yesterday when he was at our house about getting on a bull for getting on a horse for Bronk Rumford, that they needed to test it out, but he didn't have pickup men. He just had to go do it. And that Bronk knew he'd probably go ahead and do it. And he said, I was pretty tough, and I don't doubt it. I knew I'm sure he was.
True. Yeah, that's a true story.
Yeah. So awesome. Well, I want to make sure everybody knows where they can find information about Blade Solutions. And so I believe it was safemowing.com. Is that
It
correct?
it is. If they go to safemowing.com, they'll find our website and a plethora of information on there. So, and then if they want to email us, they'll see on there at support@safemowing.com. And there's an old puncher that sits right here in front of this computer and answers every email just about as fast as it comes in.
Good for you. There's one thing to be said about knowing who's getting your information, and we kind of get that with customers too. They know when they call us, they're getting my mom, my sister,
Yep.
me, salesman, dad. And so it's nice to know the face behind the business.
Right.
And if they go on social media, you're under Blade Solutions, correct?
Correct. Correct. And they can
Yep.
find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, X, Twitter. So we're on all of them.
Perfect. Well, I will include some photos and links onto this video that we'll post this on YouTube and I'll make sure that those links are under there so they can find you. But yeah, I would encourage folks to check it out and think about safe mowing and safe for the environment and safe for your equipment, people and your equipment,
Yep.
Rocks
Well,
are no fun to deal with.
Yes, yes, and the safety factor of it is huge. It's
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that when I was thinking about equipment friendly. But then as I started doing actual customer discovery and working on that, 80,000 lawnmower related accidents per year, 75 deaths, 800 children run over annually, 600 of those resulting in life changing amputations. So it's real.
Wow.
And when you talk about 54 million lawns in the U.S. alone, that doesn't seem like a huge number till one of them's yours, and then it's very huge.
Yeah. No, I understand. I think it's a great investment, a safe investment, and we're definitely looking into it for us. I just recently kind of came across everything, and my brother was like, "Oh yeah," showed me your Facebook page, and I said, "We've got to get Richard on the podcast so we can talk about this some more." So I appreciate you coming on. It's a joy. I will make sure we get you and Dad together here sometime soon.
I'll look forward to that. Heather, thank you very, very much. I'm so grateful that you called, and it was so great to catch back up. So thanks for having me.
And I wrote a note down from my brother, and here I forgot to ask you, but he said, make sure to ask him how he stays in such good shape. Are you staying in good shape? So is there a secret there that you need to share with us?
I just tell them, it's like I said, I start at 03 every morning. I always have. It's just my time. And the first thing I do is spend quiet time with my Bible and the Word and prayer, and I do a little devotional on my personal social media every morning, and for them and pray, and then I always figure from about 4 to 4:30 to 5 is PT, and I'll always try to knock out at least 100 of something, 100 push-ups, or I'll combine and do 50 push-ups and 50 jump squats, and there was a time I would do 300, and so I'd do 100 push-ups, 100 jump squats, 100 sit-ups, and I would rotate and do different things every day, and stuff. But that's the biggest deal, is. Yeah, and I used to tell people that all the time, riding, you try. You have to try. And if you don't try, you don't earn it.
That's great.
So,
well, Ethan, he must have seen somebody talk about it or heard you talking about it or something, but it's good to know. I think that's a great pointer. It's a good way to start your day.
yep.
Now, maybe not everybody starts it at 0300, but that's what works for you.
Yeah, you can pick just as long as you're not burning daylight.
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I happened to look down as we were closing, and I thought I better ask you about that. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, this time I will let you go.
Okay.
We appreciate it.
All right, Heather. Thank you very much. Tell the rest of the family hello for me.
I will. You too. Have a good one.
Okay. All right. Later.